around, particularly towards the southwest of England, but towards the west we have seen cloud thickening, and that's tied in with this weather front that's spreading in from the Atlantic, and this weather front is going to bring a very wet spell of weather across many western parts through Friday night into Saturday. So you can see some heavy rain affecting western Scotland and Northern Ireland through the night, with a warning in force from midnight, but elsewhere across the UK largely dry, still one or two showers, a few fog patches towards the south, but actually for many areas it'll be a quiet night and not cold anywhere. Temperatures not falling below 14 to 16 degrees, with those winds starting to strengthen across parts of Scotland. So for much of the UK, we're going off to a dry start on Saturday with some early sunshine, but across the west, rain from the word go will be quite heavy across Northern Ireland and western Scotland, and that rain will continue for much of the day. So that's what's going to bring the risk of that localised flooding. We will see rain starting to spread in across the west of Wales, southwest England, but elsewhere largely dry with some sunny spells in places, but that could spark off some heavy, possibly thundery showers through the afternoon with the risk of hail, with those strong winds continuing across the far north. Still warm and humid though in that sunshine. Now through Saturday evening and overnight, although showers will spread their way northwards, it's only dry for a time, but we'll see more heavy rain spreading in across Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England. So again, those rainfall totals mounting up across parts of Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, largely dry, like I said, and again, no real problems with temperatures holding out 14 to 17 degrees. So some parts of the east will get off to a largely dry start on Sunday morning with some early brightness. Still a spell of rain across parts of Scotland, but this rain in the west will spread its way eastwards as we head through Sunday. So most of us will see a spell of rain. Still dry across the far southeast of England and East Anglia, and brighter skies following and from the west as we head into the afternoon. Still rather warm though in that sunshine. Staying changeable into the early part of next week with a mixture of showers and longer spells of rain, but still with some sunshine in between and staying warm.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's Friday night, it's the 2nd of December, and like a stubborn case of chlamydia, I'm back. On Mark Dolan tonight, 25 years after her tragic and untimely death, my Mark Meets guest is Diana, Princess of Wales' former bodyguard, Ken Wharfe. In the big question, should we introduce laws to make striking harder? And in my big opinion, I'll be discussing whether GPs are deserving of their record pay rise. I've had a holiday, but I've missed you. In fact, I've had such a good holiday, I've forgotten that it's September. We've got a busy show you won't want to miss a second. Remember, we don't do boring, and neither does Tatiana Sanchez, who's got the headlines.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good evening. It is 9:03. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. An investigation has been launched following a security breach in the Commons after Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves together around the Speaker's chair. Posing as tourists, they'd booked an official tour of the building. Outside, dozens of other climate protesters draped banners and padlocked their necks to the railings. 8 people were arrested. A review has found that Dame Cressida Dick felt intimidated into stepping down as Met Police Commissioner after an ultimatum from Sadiq Khan. The inquiry carried out by Sir Thomas Windsor also found that due process was not followed. Conservative Assembly members are demanding an apology from the Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan says the review was clearly biased and ignores the facts. The parliamentary inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled MPs over Partygate is unfair and fundamentally flawed. That's according to a top barrister. Lord Pannick was tasked by the government to provide a legal opinion on the inquiry's investigation. Well, in his report, which reportedly cost the taxpayer nearly £130,000, he found the probe would be unlawful if taken to the courts. However, the chairman of the Parliamentary Standards Committee says the legal advice was misjudged. Voting in the Tory leadership contest has now come to a close. The result is set to be announced on Monday. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will take over from Boris Johnson as the next Prime Minister after a contest dominated by the cost of living crisis. Well, Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi says whoever becomes our next Prime Minister needs to extend the cost of living support until next year. Speaking at a policy exchange event in London, he added it would help defeat the tactics used by Vladimir Putin. He also said the UK needs strong leadership and infrastructure to improve the British economy. New rail strikes have been announced, with the TSSA union saying it will join the RMT both on the 15th and the 17th of September in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Well, talks between the unions and rail industry have been ongoing, but there's been no breakthrough or new offers so far. Now, the FBI found over 11,000 government files during their raid of former US President Donald Trump's Florida home earlier this month. They also found 48 empty folders labelled as classified. Some of those were labelled confidential, secret, and 18 of them top secret. Recovery of the files is part of an ongoing investigation into whether Trump illegally retained national defence information. He, of course, has previously denied any wrongdoing. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. 25 years after her tragic and untimely death, my Mark Meets guest is Diana, the Princess of Wales's former bodyguard, Ken Wharfe. If British security forces had been responsible for that fateful night in Paris, would she still be with us? That's a question I'll be putting to Ken Wharfe later in the show. In the big question, should we introduce laws to make striking harder? In the news agenda with my panel, will we miss Boris Johnson? Was Diana the greatest princess? And are zoos outdated? Reacting to these stories and many more are my brilliant panel tonight of Olympic swimmer, former British Olympic swimmer Mark Foster, best-selling author and commentator Emma Wolfe, and radio and Fleet Street legend Mike Porky Parry. We'll also be looking through tomorrow's front pages at 10:30 on the dot. And in my take at 10, Diana remembered. Sorry, Meghan, but that is what a real princess is supposed to be. Now, I want to hear from you throughout the show, Mark at gbnews.uk. You know it's the best part of my show when you get in touch. And this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. So, a very busy 2 hours to come. Big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with this one. This will give you a high temperature and make you cough. With millions of Brits around the country struggling to secure a doctor's appointment, The Telegraph are today reporting that GPs in England have secured an unprecedented 17% pay rise. GP partners, who make up the majority of family doctors, saw average incomes rise by £20,000 to 142 grand in the 12 months after the first lockdown. The 17% rise, the largest on record, came as the NHS moved to a system that's called total triage, with patients refused GP appointments in person unless they had a telephone consultation first. Good luck getting one of those. A 17% pay rise, so much for wage restraints at a time of spiralling inflation. This is quite a bonanza for GPs who in too many cases closed their doors over the last 2.5 years in their total and, in my view, misguided obsession with COVID. Remember, the National Health Service became the National COVID Service, and the consequence of emptying their waiting rooms and cancelling so-called non-urgent appointments, a waiting list potentially 12 million people long. And much worse diseases, of course, cancer, type 2 diabetes, dementia. If you ask me, with a survival rate of over 99%, almost anything was worse than COVID. Policy, however, suggested otherwise. The most egregious example of which is the backlog in cancer treatment. We know the key to cancer is catching it early. But now, for example, a young mother must say goodbye to her husband and small children after failing to get an appointment with her GP to have that lump investigated. Well done, everyone. Countless viewers to this show have emailed me about their struggles during the pandemic and since to get a GP appointment. And the GP's reward? Thousands of pounds more a year. Now, if I'd run a GP practice, I would have kept my doors open 7 days a week. Of course, the meddling health authorities would have stopped me. What a shame. There are plenty of great general practitioners out there, but the NHS is collapsing under the weight of its own disastrous policies, like spending thousands on woke diversity courses, ironically, for the most diverse health service on the planet. Like spending thousands on rainbow zebra crossings in front of hospitals, which achieve little except confusing guide dogs. They spend millions on unaccountable middle managers on six-figure salaries, and now they reward the worst performing part of our crumbling health service, general practice. Consultants and frontline medics in the UK are world-class, whatever your illness. Our nurses are amazing. Once you get treatment in the NHS, it's usually brilliant. But it starts with a GP appointment. And all too often, the doctor will not see you now. Did you know the health service works out at a cost of £10,000 for every household every year? 10 grand per household annually. For that, we should be able to call our GP in the morning and get an appointment later that day, like we used to. Not be told to call back later, hope for a cancellation, or wait 2 or 3 or 4 weeks for an appointment. GP surgeries make the customer service at Ryanair look positively streamlined and efficient. Our NHS, which boasts the best frontline professionals anywhere, was looking pale by comparison to other health systems before the pandemic. Post-COVID, the NHS is about ready for its post-mortem. Our NHS has gone from being loved to being resented, as families watch their friends and relatives suffer or die because of a failing system. And it's not about money. £10,000 a year per household. Do me a favour. Give us half that money and we'll sort medical provision for ourselves. Right now, the NHS is on life support. Our next Prime Minister, plot spoiler, Liz Truss, must show courage and commit to a seismic reorganisation of this bloated, overpriced, inefficient disaster of a system. The NHS, brilliant people, terrible structure. And for all this money, we're actually getting iller. That's right, we spend this money, we're getting iller. Management of preventable diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes, all expanding like our waistlines on the watch of GPs across the land, threatens not just the physical health of the nation, but the economic health too. Mark my words, there will be a point at which the NHS bankrupts Britain. Good luck getting an appointment then. Scores of Brits, as we well know, have been borrowing money or tapping into savings for medical procedures they simply cannot wait for on the NHS. Hip replacements, knee replacements, cataract procedures, and even cancer treatment. But scores of Brits are also now using private GP services as well. You know, those websites and apps where you can have a video call with a private GP or drop-in clinics. Convenient, maybe, but most people just don't have the money to be able to do this regularly. And with cash-strapped Brits paying out for private treatments, the NHS loses its moral authority too. With people paying out for private treatment, the NHS risks becoming like the BBC, a service many don't use, but one everyone's got to pay for. And don't forget, if you're paying for private health treatment, you're paying twice, given the fact that you've already paid your taxes for the NHS. GPs don't need a pay rise, they need shock therapy and smelling salts. And if they don't start seeing patients face to face and tackling that self-inflicted catalogue of untreated illnesses, public support for our health service will dwindle further. If the NHS, and in particular GP practices, don't change, change will be forced upon them. It will be the tough medicine they should have been prescribed years ago. GPs are getting more money for a service which is getting worse. It's enough to make you sick. What do you think? Have you had trouble getting an NHS appointment during the pandemic or since? Let me know your experience. mark@gbnews.co.uk. I'll get to your emails after the break. Reacting to my big opinion monologue tonight are my brilliant panel of radio and Fleet Street legend Mike Porky Parry, former British Olympic swimmer Mark Foster, and best-selling author and commentator Emma Wharfe. Let me start with you, if I may, Emma. I believe that we're paying more money for a service that's getting worse. What's your view?
I couldn't agree more. To say that this pay rise, £20,000 during the pandemic, on average, when the rest of the country was struggling either on furlough or to get grants or just struggling with unemployment, to say it's difficult to justify is a huge understatement. But, you know, Mark, I think primary care has been a joke for a long time. Basically, you're told to ring, the entire country is told to ring at 8 o'clock in the morning. So the entire country is ringing at 8 o'clock in the morning, at the same time, on the same phone lines to get an appointment. You then are allegedly meant to get a call back later that day, which doesn't happen. I honestly, and GPs are self-employed. So during the pandemic, they were eligible to apply for these grants and on average were awarded £12,500. And when you do go, when you get an appointment with a 14-year-old doctor who isn't your named GP, they stare at their screen. My father used to say, when you went to your GP, they would ask you to take your clothes off and lie on the couch. They would give you a physical, medical examination to check that everything was OK. Nowadays, you go along, they stare at their screen, and sometimes they make eye contact. I've had appointments with GPs where they haven't even glanced at me. So, frankly, with GPs working 3 days a week, on average 3 days a week, and being paid £142,000, I think you can tell what my opinion is.
We certainly can. No one sits on the fence on my show. Mark Foster, a warm welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. I think we can all agree that the people working in the NHS are world class and they've been through hell over the last couple of years in relation to the pandemic. We love our nurses. The doctors do a great job. What about the porters? What about the cleaners and the ambulance drivers, the paramedics? You name it. My problem is not with the personnel, but the system. What's your view?
Well, as you said there, I was writing down some notes earlier and thinking that the GPs get this massive pay rise, and I know there's a lot more nurses and background staff that work in these hospitals. What do they actually get? I'm all for sort of performance-related pay, because I think if you do a really good job, and I know this is a generalisation of every GP, and I'm sure there's some brilliant GPs out there, but overwhelmingly, when you read the data and read the information, it doesn't look very good. I mean, it mentions here overwhelming the public satisfaction of GPs has fallen to its lowest level ever. The 17% pay rise, as you mentioned, I think is massive. And then during the pandemic, GPs were actually paid £13 per jab. Well, their surgeries were raising to £15 during the pandemic. So I know they have a very, very difficult job, and there are a lot of amazing GPs out there. But if I read everything that I read here, it doesn't paint a very good picture.
Mike Porky Parry, given your rather exotic lifestyle in Fleet Street over the last few decades, you are a walking medical miracle. And I know you've had a great experience in terms of the care of your heart disease over the years. But what's your view about the general practice surgeries that, in my view, are not delivering?
Well, I'm a little surprised that we haven't looked at the history of where this all started. Every politician knows it's very easy to give, but it's very difficult to take back. Now, the person who gave to GPs all those years ago, 2004, was Tony Blair, of course. In 2004, he caved in and gave them something like a 35% pay rise, which first put doctors, GPs, on the £100,000 a year salary, which is the minimum they get today. They get much more than that. Some get $250,000. Now, nobody knows why Tony Blair did that. The other thing he introduced at the time was, he said, look, I tell you what, if you give £6,000 back, you don't have to work at weekends or in the evenings. Now, that was a Tony Blair initiative. Like loads of initiatives from that government, aided by Gordon Brown, the man who wrecked the British economy for decades to come, this is where it all started. So what I'm saying is that whilst I agree with my fellow panellists here, and I agree with you entirely, Mark, it's a complete mess, the mess started with Tony Blair, and it's going to take a very, very strong new health secretary after next Monday, when Liz Truss becomes the new Prime Minister, to get this system back into working shape. Can I say one thing? I live down in Stockbroker Belt, Surrey. I'm not going to tell anybody where my local surgery is because it must be the best in the world. I can ring at 8 and get in there by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They are a fantastic service and it's very well run. So I don't recognise this waiting 4 weeks, waiting 5 weeks. I must just be very lucky, but I suspect there are lots of other surgeries in the country which are just as efficient.
I'm sure there are, and it's important to point out, Emma Wharfe, that we do have many heroic GPs with a massive workload, and many have struggled to treat people in the course of the pandemic, working under very severe restrictions. My criticism of some of their policies, including non-urgent appointments being cancelled, will have come from the health department, not actually the GP themselves. So they have had a tough couple of years. Do we need to take that into account?
I don't think we need to call GPs heroic. I don't recognise this whole thing about heroes. People are doing their jobs. As Mike says, they're extremely well remunerated, aren't they?
Yeah.
To sit at a computer and to see people in a warm office, you know, on a daily basis, I don't think you need to be paid £142,000 for that. There are many, many, many individuals within the health service who are amazing. There are also many who are not. When my father was dying, there were nurses there who were so amazing and so kind and made it the most beautiful, moving experience ever of our lives that final week. When I was having my baby, there were some midwives there who were absolutely appalling and treated some of the women, you know, in lockdown, having a baby, no visitors, on your own, who treated women very badly. So I don't think we need to generalise. There are some amazing people within the NHS, of course there are, but we're talking specifically about primary care and about GPs right now. And I think the GP service is broken, and I think getting an appointment is extremely hard, and I think GP surgeries need to reopen and start seeing people properly.
Well, yes, I do believe that the backlog is self-inflicted because the NHS became the National COVID Service. They pursued an effective policy of zero COVID and it failed. We're paying the health price now, Mark Foster. One more thought, though, just to kind of throw a bone in the direction of GPs. Many say that they're overworked, they're stressed, they're suffering from depression, they're drinking, some of them are taking drugs, they're doing 18-hour days, and many are leaving the profession. Ought we to take that into account?
Well, I guess you do. I suppose ultimately, is it a form of, I'm not going to say a form of bullying, but in a sense, holding the government to ransom, you know, if you don't pay, then we won't do it. And then who does it? Who fills the void? But I think every industry could potentially say that. Personal experience, I've never had a problem with GPs in the past myself, but I'm only going from what everybody else has said here. I don't go to the GP very often. I probably will when I get a little bit older. But my reflection is from the service that's been given to, I know, family and friends and other people I know, has generally been very, very good from a service point of view. But I find it, the only thing I find daunting is the fact that they get a 17% pay rise when, you know, I don't think the job's changed at all, has it?
Well, yeah, Mark Foster, of course you've never had trouble getting a GP appointment. People want to examine Britain's greatest swimmer, an Adonis no less. What has been your experience of GP services? Is primary care fit for purpose? Let me know your views. Mark at gbnews.uk. Coming up in the news agenda with my panel, will we miss Boris Johnson? Also, was Diana the greatest princess? And are zoos outdated? Speaking of Diana, my Mark Meets guest, live in the studio is Ken Wharfe, the former protection officer to Princess Diana, William and Harry. But next in the big question, should we have stricter anti-strike laws? Get the kettle on. I'll see you in 2.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The emails are coming in thick and fast. A big reaction to my big opinion monologue. Is primary care in this country fit for purpose? Have you had trouble getting a GP appointment? We report today that they've had a 17% pay rise. Well, strong reaction coming in on email, mark@gbnews.uk. Maria says, hi, Mark, you look radiant since coming back from your holiday. Thank you, Maria. Very, very kind. I work as an administrator for the district nursing service and triage many, many referrals. In my big opinion, the nurses are far more professional and caring than the GPs, and certainly are not paid £142,000 a year. GPs are certainly very overpaid. It's a disgrace. Maria, thank you for that. Jackie says, hi, Mark. So nice to have you back. Jackie, it's great to be back. I've missed all of you so much. She says, you're absolutely right about the NHS. It's no longer a viable option. My father was recently in hospital and got no care whatsoever. The nurses were all from abroad and had no interest in the patients or being a nurse. They fitted catheters or urine bags to all patients whilst they sat on computers or laughing with colleagues talking about what courses they were on. Doctors and nurses are overpaid and given too much control over patients. There you go, Jackie, not happy with the current state of the NHS. However, this show's all about opinions, and if you disagree, I particularly enjoy that, mark@gbnews.uk. And here is one from Cynthia, who says, hi, Mark, don't knock GPs. My daughter-in-law is a GP and works in a busy practice. They've been advertising for another doctor for over a year, but no one is willing to join a very popular practice. She says, why would anyone want to train as a GP when the government doesn't back them? The media slates them continually, and the pay is not very good. She works 3 days a week, which is a 12-hour day with no break, and then she spends the 2 days off, in inverted commas, writing letters to consultants, etc. She visits, talks on the phone and sees patients regularly. They try to expand the practice, but the Primary Care Trust won't allow them extra funding. Please stop hating on GPs. Cynthia, thank you so much for that, and my warm best wishes to your daughter-in-law, who I've got no doubt is an excellent GP. Well, keep those opinions coming. Mark at gbnews.uk. It's time now for this. Let's do the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. Tonight, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has called for an end to synchronised strikes with rail workers, postal workers, civil servants, doctors and others threatening winter strike action over pay. Is it time to introduce laws making going on strike more difficult? Or is being able to down tools to improve your pay and conditions a fundamental and inalienable right? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome the Leader of the House of Commons, Conservative MP Mark Spencer, Emeritus Professor and British historian Keith Laybourne, and former Sunday Mirror newspaper editor Paul Connew. If I could start with you, Professor, you obviously have a lot of knowledge and experience about the history of industrial action in our country. Do you think we need tougher strike laws, given your knowledge of the past?
No. I think it's very simple. I mean, we've got the toughest strike laws we've had since the Second World War. In 2016, they were turned up. We've never had a situation where you had to give employers 2 weeks' notice. That was always a week. And in the 19th century, there was the distinction of it was a criminal offence if you went out as a worker, but as an employer, it was a civil offence if you didn't give them 7 days' notice. We've had a situation where the ballots, you've got to get 50% of the people voting, and then you've got to get a majority. And if you're in public areas, it's quite clearly more difficult, because if there were 100 people, you've got to get 50 or 40 of those have got to vote for a strike. So really, it's very difficult. And actually, if you think about it, we have very few strikes. We lose 800,000, 1 million man days a year. This is since the mid-1980s, since the miners' strike, when you would have 30, 40 million a year, or the winter of discontent of 78, 79, when you were getting 30, 40 million days strike, or the general strike in 1926, 164 million days lost in that year. We have actually had a very peaceful period for the last 30 years. I think the largest number of man days lost was in 2002. So I think it works very well. People have to have a right. If you're faced with a situation, I mean, one of the worst things really is the idea of if you get a mandate for a strike, it's got to be renewed within 6 months. If you do that, all it does is prolong disputes because they have to review them. They've just done them for the Criminal Bar Association. They've just voted again. In fact, actually, they're not striking, are they? They're just deciding not to take cases up. So I think it's wrong. I think you have to have that balance. Otherwise, what you've got, is in a sense no power for the working groups in the trade unions. And the trade union movement is very weak compared to what it used to be. In 1979, 13.5 million members, 6.5 million today. Really, in a sense, the position is relatively weak. Obviously, I'm in a different position, but I'm in the UCU, the University Colleges Union. Just think about the situation. Since 2008, their real wages have gone down 20%. 2009-10, they never got a wage increase. They're now being offered 3%. They're going to be facing forever 13%. You have to have the right to protest. Going back to the barristers, a quarter of them have left since 2017. And it's because the wages and the payments, I should say, have not gone up. So you have to have that balance. And in a democratic country, you have to have strikes. We have the strictest probably in Europe. So really, in a sense, I think by and large, you don't really get that many, conflicts of this size or impending size. 1979 was probably the last, and the miners' strike of 1984-85. By and large, it works. But in fact, obviously, inflation at the rate it's going is a real problem behind driving a lot of these activities that are going on at that time, on the threatened strikes that are going on.
However, you do wonder, don't you, Mark Spencer, MP and Leader of the House of Commons, whether the likes of Mick Lynch, the RMT rail union leader, is agitating for trouble, very politically motivated. He's seeking unreasonable pay rises, which are inflation busting. We know we're running a deficit. We've got a colossal national debt. And many think he wants to bring down the government. Don't we need tougher laws to deal with troublemakers like Mick Lynch?
So I think it's true that there is a little bit of political motivation here, but I think the government does recognise that there is a huge challenge with the cost of living, and people do want to try and keep pace their wages with the size of their bills. That's why we've introduced a huge package of support for individuals. But I think we learned the lessons of the 1970s, that those huge mass walkouts, those big strike actions, only damage society. They don't actually work in the long term. And we have to recognise as a society that we've got to solve these challenges together. And there are people in my constituency that are working in the private sector on fairly low wages, who are literally busting their backsides, working 50, 60 hours a week to try and make ends meet. And they can't just go on strike if they're working on the Tesco checkout, or they're an electrician or a plumber or a self-employed person like that. They've got to turn up to work every single day to pay the taxes to keep the system afloat.
Well, indeed, and I think that's going to be the view of many of my viewers and listeners. But Paul Connew, what's your opinion?
I couldn't agree with the professor more. Quite apart from the looming cost of living crisis, for the last 10 years, pay rises in this country have been below the rate of inflation. We now have inflation off the scale and heading that way, and tougher strike legislation is not going to change it. This is a government in trouble, who are desperately trying to recreate the late 70s, early 80s mentality, the same slogans, union barons, holding the country to ransom. But they are, I think, misreading the public mood music. The polls are showing a remarkable degree of sympathy, even among Tory voters, not Tory party members, which is a difference, but among Tory voters, especially in the temporarily lost, I suspect, red wall areas, where there is sympathy for the strikers. And I think your attack on Mick Lynch, I think Mick Lynch has become a bit of a folk hero. He is not an ultra-extremist. He's a tough negotiator. But we have a government and Grant Shapps, a man who won't go anywhere near the table. I mean, in the old days of beer and sandwiches, it sometimes worked. But this is a government who are trying to whip up, misreading the mood, as I said, trying to whip up the old cliches, and it's not working this time because the cost of living crisis is exploding in such a way that people, whether they're on the left or the right, are feeling the pinch. And the idea of declaring a sort of a class war or on the union movement is not going to work in the way that it did back in the heyday of Thatcher, if you call it a heyday.
Well, I think there are parallels, though, Paul Connew. I think there are parallels between what happened in the late 70s when the unions caused Britain to be the sick and lazy man of Europe. We're seeing it again with talk of synchronised strikes. The bottom line is that we're running a budget deficit. We've got over £2.1 trillion worth of national debt. Inflation, more or less 10% and rising. We can't afford these pay increases, which is exactly what the unions want. What happens if the rail workers, the postal workers, civil servants and doctors all get what they want? The country, Paul Connew, will be broke.
They're not going to get exactly what they want, but they will get, or will fight to get. I suspect they will get somewhere nearer, certainly much nearer the current offers on the table, because we have a new prime minister coming in whose economic policies, as spelled out during the campaign, do not make sense. Very few economists and a lot of Tory MPs I know don't believe her policies stack up either. What she has been, assuming she's going to win, which looks virtually certain, although I think the margin of victory will be somewhat smaller than the polls predict, but she is going to have to face up to reality. So far, Liz Truss has been talking to that tiny, unrepresentative audience of the Tory party membership who represent less than half of 1% of the UK electorate. It's an absolute nonsense that another Prime Minister is imposed on the country by such an unrepresentative, tiny minority of the overall electorate of 47 million. We can't even find out exactly what the Tory party membership is. There's an interesting legal move being started by the Tortoise website, headed by the former Times editor and BBC director of news, James Harding, to actually try to force the Tory party to reveal, A, what its membership figures really are, so we know precisely how many people are deciding our next Prime Minister, and also to find out what the percentage of Tory party membership are not British citizens either, who can vote for a Tory leader and a Prime Minister, but in many cases, are not in a position to vote in a general election. This is beyond satire.
All right, well, we'll have that conversation on another occasion. But, Professor, let me come back to you for your final thoughts on this. The bottom line is that the country is broke. These wage demands are unreasonable and the unions are irresponsible and must be actually put in their place and potentially through legislation.
Well, all that's nonsense. I mean, first of all, you said that Britain was
can we afford these pay rises?
In the 1970s, that's simply not true. It's not the trade unions who are ruining the country now. So let's get that into perspective. I think really, in a sense, if you go back to those the 70s and the 80s, the first thing that Margaret Thatcher did was to recognise that the level of inflation, and she set up a number of commissions that paid the army 20% more, the police 20% more, they paid the teachers 20% more to get it sort of sorted out and then to level out. So even she recognised that you had to do that. Really, in a sense, to start blaming the unions, which for the failure of British industry to invest and properly invest and actually properly pay their people is simply nonsense and wrong.
Well, look, the country is broke. That's my view. We'll have to agree to disagree on that one.
Who's breaking this country? Who's not paying the amount? It's all right you saying this. You're blaming everything on 6 million trade unionists. There's a Conservative Party that's been in power for, since 2010. We need something, a party that recognises. I mean, if you build up and store up injustice after injustice, inadequate pay increases after pay increases, what are you going to do? But remember, each person, I go back to the point, each person who's not a pensioner, and even I'm a pensioner, even is also a consumer as well as a producer.
Keith Laybourne.
And I go back to the previous speaker there on that, and that is that to a large extent, there's a lot of support for people this time in a way perhaps there wasn't in 1979.
Keith Laybourne. Yeah. Keith Laybourne, I've only got a couple of seconds left, and I want to come to Mark Spencer. But before you go, briefly, if you can, these wage demands, I mean, you don't accept that the country's broke. Well, we'll have to disagree on that one.
Well,
if these wage demands are fulfilled, what will that do to inflation? And who's going to be paying for it? Why should the grandchildren of my viewers have to tackle the cost of extraordinary wage demands of these workers, given the fact that any bonuses, any boost in wages will come from borrowing? It's more borrowed money.
We're taxing them, but we're not, because they get tax exemptions for investing in the North Sea. Come on, let's have a society where you recognise that. I mean, let's come back to the other thing. We're going to have increased poverty, fuel poverty. We should be addressing those questions. People should be being paid proper living wages. And you're saying the trade unions are to blame for it. No, they're nothing to do with it. It's other factors, and you know that very well.
They're asking for pay rises that the country cannot afford. A student in GCSE economics could understand that one.
Striking a negotiating position,
deeply grateful for your time. Well, look, let's bring Mark Spencer back in. Mark,
all these prices. I mean, come on. You're asking people to accept 3% when it's 10, 12, 13, 14. And you're asking people who can't afford to live at the present time to face even larger. I mean, are we a nation of citizens and citizenship?
Wait a minute.
The nurses were offered 2 or 3%.
This is worse.
Releasing the controls.
Order.
We need a more
Professor.
society, and it's about time you start to stop knocking the unions and recognise that the unions aren't the problem. We lose 28 billion days a year in industrial injuries. We lose up to 200 million days in people not employed.
Okay,
You're complaining about 1 million days. Professor, there are other things that need to be addressed.
Professor, final question to you before I come to Mark Spencer. Were you against the 3 national lockdowns that saw us close the economy for 2.5 years?
Sorry, who are you talking to?
You.
Sorry,
Keith Laybourne.
which national economies? Which
did you speak out against lockdowns? Did you speak out against the 3 national lockdowns which forced the Treasury to borrow £500 billion?
When?
Over the last 2.5 years. We've just had a pandemic, in case you've forgotten.
No, what? In the pandemic?
Yes.
Oh, sorry,
did you object?
I'll tell you what I was against. I was against the waste of money that went on. As we know, £12 billion on PPI equipment, which government pays £4 billion to people who can't even provide.
Okay, brilliant. Keith, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Not the trade.
Thank you.
I came on here to talk about trade union history. Obviously, I'm not, but. Because you haven't really asked me that.
All right. Well, look, but Keith, I very much appreciate your input. Blimey, Mark Spencer, this is livelier than the House of Commons.
So you want to
yes.
Can I ask you for your thoughts?
Of the loud bullying voices of the trade unions, which I think we're witnessing tonight. The public sector pay rise that they're going to get is the largest in 20 years. But you've got to remember, it's normal, ordinary people that are picking up that tab, who are doing jobs which are less paid. The average railway worker owns £44,000 a year. This strike cannot be about low pay. It's not about job security, because the government's already committed that it will not do compulsory redundancies. So this is about trying to stick in the mud and not having the reforms to make the railways more efficient and more effective and a better value to the taxpayers who are out there working. And lots of my constituents would love to earn £44,000 a year. They're on nothing like that sort of salary, and they're having to pick up the tab in the private sector for these big wage increases, which the country cannot afford. And we've got to get some balanced wage increases, which the country cannot afford. And we've got to get some balance and fairness into the system and recognise if we all go for double-digit pay rises, then it simply will push up the spiral of inflation and we'll end up in the same place all over again.
Keith Laybourne, thank you so much for your time, Emeritus Professor and British historian, and also my thanks to former Sunday Mirror newspaper editor Paul Connew. Whilst I've got you on the line, Mark Spencer, just a quick reaction to the House of Commons being stormed by Extinction Rebellion today, with members of Extinction Rebellion supergluing themselves to the chamber.
Yeah, I think it's really disappointing, because every time you get an event like this, the reaction is to increase security, and you actually put another barrier between politicians and the general public. And we really have benefited from a fantastic open democracy in this country, access to politicians, access to your MP. And every time there is an issue of this nature, it increases the barriers of security between normal people and their members of parliament. And I think that is a great shame for our democracy.
Indeed. And 2 other quick ones, if I may. Very shortly, we'll be speaking to Paul Connew about his new book, all about Boris Johnson. And the question I'll be asking both Paul Connew and my panel is, will we miss Boris Johnson? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we'll miss him enormously, but he's going to hang around. He's not going to leave the House of Commons. He is a masterful communicator, is Boris. He has an ability to connect with people and to get his message across, the likes of which I don't think we'll see for a very long time. So we will miss him a great deal.
And is Liz Truss going to be a good Prime Minister? Mark Spencer.
Well, we'll find out. I hope so. We don't know whether she's won yet. We'll find out on Monday whether it's Liz or Rishi. But there's some big challenges ahead, and I shall be supporting whoever the winner is.
Mr. Spencer, we know how busy you are. Thank you so much for making the time to join us on Mark Dolan tonight. Leader of the House of Commons, Conservative MP Mark Spencer. Also, Emeritus Professor, British historian, academic and a brilliant public speaker, Keith Laybourne. Keith, thank you so much for joining us as well. Really enjoyed having you on the programme. And Paul Connew, former editor of the Sunday Mirror. Do stick around, because after this, we'll be asking Paul and my panel, will you miss and will we miss Boris Johnson? And my Mark Meets guest is Princess Diana's former bodyguard, Ken Wharfe, telling his story live at 10 o'clock. We've got the papers at 10:30 as well, with full panel reaction. But next, will you miss Boris Johnson? See you in 2.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A big reaction on email to my big question debate. I'll get to those very shortly. A lot of people concerned about the professor. Mark, Keith Laybourne is a loudmouth idiot. And why is it only the public sector that get represented? Those working on the checkouts, which incidentally are being done away with, get low pay, as well as those picking and packing and delivering our goods. Well said, Elizabeth. You know the best bit of my show is when you guys get in touch. Keep those emails coming, mark@gbnews.uk. Now, after 3 years in office, Boris Johnson's premiership is coming to an end. He's the man who delivered on Brexit, led our country through an unexpected pandemic, and caused a bit of controversy with his lockdown antics. Let's have a look at some of Boris's greatest hits.
The problem with the Labour Party today, Mr. Speaker, is that he's a lawyer, not a leader. That's the truth.
I'm not sure I can tweet any of this.
Yesterday I went, as we all must, to Peppa Pig World. I don't know if you've been to Peppa Pig World. Who's been to? Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World. Not enough. And Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world.
There you go. Boris Johnson takes his bow. Well done to my producer, Mescano, who spent all afternoon watching videos of Boris Johnson. There's someone that deserves a pay rise. Now, still with us is Paul Connew, former editor of the Sunday Mirror. He's co-authored a number of books covering the BBC to the pandemic. His most recent book, set to be a bestseller, is Boris Johnson, Media Creation, Media Clown, Media Casualty. Fascinating read. It's winning rave reviews, Paul. Congratulations on its publication. Obviously, OK, well, that's good. A bit of a team effort. However, Paul, do you think that the public will miss Boris Johnson?
They'll miss him, but whether they miss him for better or worse is the question. And I think that although the Tory party membership clearly are going to miss him because he seems to rate much higher with them than either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. But the polls show, though, that the general public have finally tired of and seen through the Boris Johnson. The Teflon coating, the legendary Teflon coating, is now so shot full of political bullet holes, it's beyond repair. Although, I think Boris Johnson, of course, whose hero is Winston Churchill, the ultimate political comeback kid, I don't think he thinks he's finished. And I suspect he is going to be the spectre at Liz Truss's non-feast. Boris isn't going away. I mean, personally, I think he could have a great career as the PR man for Peppa Pig World, but he is going to still be a major player in politics, and he may well be the Tory party's worst enemy, because if they were to be so desperate they turn back to Boris if Liz Truss turns out, as I suspect she will, to be a dud, then the party is in a bigger trouble and possibly fatally wounded. Boris will still be a player because he won't go away, doesn't want to go away. But as far as being a positive influence is concerned, I think his days are over.
Paul, congratulations on the release of the book. It's called Boris Johnson, Media Creation, Media Clown, Media Casualty. Several contributions, including from the former Sunday Mirror editor, Paul Connew. Brilliant stuff. What do we think about this, Emma Wolfe? Will we miss Boris Johnson? He's been chucked out of office. Be careful what you wish for.
I think we will miss him. I think we'll miss him as a performer, as a statesman. I thought his resignation speech was rather fine, actually. I watched it and I appreciated it, and I love his use of language. I love the fact that he's a classicist. I know he's deeply immoral. I know he's a womanizer. I know he lied and lied and lied to us over Partygate. Obviously, right now, he's trying to control the narrative. He wants this Churchillian legacy. He wants his legacy to be Ukraine, getting Brexit done, whatever that means. He wants all of that. You know, he saved the world from COVID. He got all these jabs into our arms, all of that stuff. And actually, what we're going to remember him for is being more interesting than a deeply dull and uninspiring Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak.
Well, yeah, you have to wonder, don't you, whether there's going to be a vacuum in the absence of Boris Johnson. I mean, Fleet Street will miss him, won't they?
Well, we'll all miss him. I'll miss him terribly. Did anybody see his speech today at Sizewell C nuclear power station? No. I mean, it was vintage Boris. Yeah. He'd got a new suit, believe it or not. He'd got a new tie, a new shirt. Somebody had come along and said, smarten yourself up. And it was vintage Boris Johnson, right from the start, you know, even before COVID had hit him and slowed him down. This was vintage Boris Johnson. And anybody who saw that speech today will have said to themselves, oh, my God, what have we done? And he's going to be a massive power player in the future, isn't he? Because if he gets behind Liz Truss, she's got a chance in the future. If he doesn't, she is dead in the water. He can still inspire people. Paul Connew, an old Fleet Street colleague of mine, said the latest polls showing now we're tiring of Boris Johnson. Don't believe that for a moment. I don't believe that for a moment. He's still the most charismatic politician we've had in the last 30 or 40 years, certainly since Tony Blair anyway. And believe me, he's a power in the land way above, head and shoulders above most other politicians.
There you go. Well, look, Mark Foster, I'll get your thoughts on this in the next hour because we've got lots more to come. My Mark Meets guest after 10 is someone who actually spent 24/7 with Diana, the Princess of Wales, for 5 years. Her former Chief Protection Officer, Ken Wharfe, live in the studio. See you shortly.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Will you miss Boris Johnson? Big reaction on email here on Mark Dolan tonight. Hillary says, yes, we'll definitely miss Boris, as there's no one who'll be as great a Prime Minister as he was. God help us if Labour get in, says Hillary. However, Stephen says, Mark, I used to be a great Boris fan until it became apparent that the stupid net zero policies were being steered from the bedroom by Carrie Antoinette. Steve, thank you for that. Keep those emails coming. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. A very busy hour to come. 25 years on from her tragic and untimely death, my Mark Meets guest is Diana, the Princess of Wales's former bodyguard, Ken Wharfe. If British security forces had been responsible for her that night, would she still be with us? A question I'll be putting to Ken in a couple of minutes. In the news agenda with my panel, was Diana the greatest princess? And are zoos outdated? Tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 with full panel reaction. And after this, my take at 10, my tribute to Diana. She's irreplaceable. I'm sorry, Meghan, but that is how a princess is supposed to be. First up, the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. An investigation has been launched following a security breach in the Commons after Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves together around the Speaker's chair. While posing as tourists, they'd booked an official tour of the building. Outside, dozens of other climate protesters draped banners and padlocked their necks to the railings. 8 people were arrested. A review has found that Dame Cressida Dick felt intimidated into stepping down as Met Police Commissioner after an ultimatum from Sadiq Khan. The inquiry carried out by Sir Thomas Windsor also found that due process wasn't followed. Conservative Assembly members are demanding an apology from the Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan says the review was clearly biased and ignores the facts. The parliamentary inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled MPs over Partygate is unfair and fundamentally flawed. That's according to a top barrister. Lord Pannick was tasked by the government to provide a legal opinion on the inquiry's investigation. In his report, which reportedly cost the taxpayer nearly £130,000, he found the probe would be unlawful if taken to the courts. However, the chairman of the Parliamentary Standards Committee says the legal advice was misjudged. Voting in the Tory leadership contest has now closed and the result is set to be announced on Monday. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will take over from Boris Johnson as the next Prime Minister after a contest dominated by the cost of living crisis. Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi says whoever becomes our next Prime Minister needs to extend the cost of living support until next year. Speaking at a policy exchange event in London, he added it would help defeat the tactics used by Russian President Vladimir Putin. He also said the UK needs strong leadership and infrastructure to improve the British economy. New rail strikes have been announced, with the TSSA union saying it will join the RMT on both the 15th and the 17th of September in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Well, talks between the unions and rail industry have been ongoing, but there's been no breakthrough or new offers so far. The FBI found over 11,000 government files during their raid of former US President Donald Trump's Florida home earlier this month. They also found 48 empty folders labelled as classified. 18 of the files found were labelled top secret. This is all part of an ongoing investigation into whether Trump illegally retained national defence information. He denies any wrongdoing. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Big stories, big guests and always big opinions. In the news agenda with my panel, was Diana the greatest princess? And are zoos outdated? Plus another topical game show and tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. And my Mark Meets guest is Princess Diana's bodyguard for 5 years and the last royal protection that she had before her untimely death 25 years ago. Ken Wharfe live in the studio. But first, it's time for my take at 10. Wednesday of this week saw a tragic milestone, the 25th anniversary of the untimely death of Princess Diana, killed in a car crash in Paris in 1997. Diana is a woman who changed the royal family, changed Britain, and in her own way changed the world. In terms of her background, although she wasn't exactly Sharon Watts from EastEnders, she wasn't the typical aristocratic royal princess either. When she met Charles, she was described in the press as a commoner, but she had uncommon gifts. Not burdened by the pomposity of royal protocol, Diana was fresh, real, honest, authentic. From day one, she did things her way and on her own terms, at times in the face of the unforgiving might of the royal family, known, of course, as the Firm. Well, she took on the Firm and won, becoming the most high-profile royal in the country, above even the Queen herself. And her popularity extended beyond these shores. She was a globally recognised, loved and admired figure. She reached out to and comforted AIDS victims, hugging them and taking their hand when it was a taboo. She sought to represent those with no voice and campaigned vociferously against landmines, among many other good causes. She served as a beacon of humanity and empathy for all of her years in the public spotlight. Her wedding to Prince Charles was one of the cultural events of the century. People had street parties. Remember the T-shirts, the hats, the towels? My mum's still got a Charles and Diana mug somewhere. Charles's face has worn out a bit from the dishwasher, but Diana's smile is still going strong. That wedding was a massive moment for the country, and you could argue the beginning of royals becoming celebrities. The crossover between our constitution and traditions on the one hand, and the media and popular culture on the other, all happening overnight, thanks to Diana. Her face, even after she tragically died, would supercharge the circulation of any newspaper or magazine, even if there wasn't a story to report. The public loved Diana, and they just wanted to see her and hear about her. Her marriage to Charles wasn't to be. It didn't help that, to put it in her words, there were 3 people in that relationship. Charles clearly always loved Camilla and should have married her in the first place. Diana paid the price for the stifling royal rules that made that impossible. And the anguish she went through in the early years of her marriage to Charles was palpable. She wasn't Charles's the one, but she was 1 in a million. And Diana was used and abused far too often in her life. I know she encouraged the press at times, but they often went too far and crossed the line. And the way she was deceived and hoodwinked into that notorious Panorama interview on the BBC with Martin Bashir was a true scandal. It led to Diana losing her royal titles and, crucially, her elite royal protection. Do the BBC have blood on their hands? You tell me. And we know that the rest of this sorry tale just gets from bad to worse, as she was taken from us in a horrific car accident a quarter of a century ago with an allegedly drunk bouncer at the wheel of her Mercedes-Benz. Diana's story is one of a life lost, but not a life wasted. Quite the opposite. She made the world a better, brighter place. And of course, she was a devoted mother, perhaps her greatest legacy. Let's hope, for the sake of Diana's memory, that the two brothers can be reconciled and rebuild their relationship. Would she have liked Meghan? You tell me. I'll never forget where I was that fateful night when she died and when the grim news came in. I think most of us know where we were. Well, I was in central London working at a radio station called 963 Liberty, which was owned by the Harrods owner, Mohammed Al-Fayed, whose son Dodi, of course, also tragically died that night. I met Dodi at the radio station. He was an incredibly charming man. It's a cruel irony that Diana appeared to be her happiest in years when pursued into that Paris tunnel by avaricious foreign paparazzi. Diana set the template for a more sustainable, more human, more relatable royal family. That legacy continues today. You can see it in the way that William and Kate relate to each other and the way that they're raising their kids. Diana brought her warmth, charisma and stunning good looks into our daily lives. She was the people's princess, absolutely, Queen of Hearts, but she was the perfect princess too. Not in spite of, but because of her imperfections. The public outpouring of grief at her funeral, whilst sneered at by some in the media, was sincere. The public were devastated to lose her. And we've missed her ever since. She's never been replaced, and she never will. We'll speak to her former bodyguard Ken Wharfe in just a moment, but let's get reaction now from radio and Fleet Street legend Mike "Porky" Parry, former British Olympic swimmer Mark Foster, and best-selling author and commentator Emma Wolfe. Mark Foster, let me start with you. Where were you when you got the terrible news that Diana had been killed?
I was just at home, and it was one of those moments where everything went on sort of pause, and one of those sort of most surreal moments where I don't know. I didn't know her, but I almost like everybody felt connected to her in a sense, and it was sort of a little bit of a daze in the fact that you thought somebody that was sort of so high profile, so untouchable, so loving, had been taken from us. So it was a very bizarre day.
Do you think that there was an overreaction among the public to her death at the time, because the media were quite critical of the outpouring of grief?
No, I don't. People feel the way they do for whatever reason. It's their feelings. They own those feelings. I think she connected with the public. You mentioned an awful lot of it there. I think she shows so much of a softer side to the royal family, to the public, and that's what Wills and Harry are doing exactly the same with now. I mean, the fact that people still go and lay flowers for her 25 years after says an awful lot. So, no, I don't think the press got things right on that occasion, no.
And Mark Foster, do you think that she set the template for the celebrity royal?
Yes. Yeah, I do. And I think Prince Harry and William have continued that, yeah.
Emma Wolfe, where were you when the news of Princess Diana being killed came through?
I was at home in Camden Town. I was listening to Capital FM. I remember they were playing some pop song. It was early in the morning, and they started sort of reporting bits about the crash, and then it sort of developed that she had actually died. And I remember running and waking up my little sister and telling her. And then a week or so later, I remember maybe 2 weeks later, going to the Mall and watching the funeral cortege, and just the whole of London the whole of the UK, seemingly, it felt like they were there. It was an amazing time, a really, really moving time.
Mike "Porky" Parry, you are central to this story. Tell us why.
Well, I released the news of Diana's death at 4:41 in the morning a.m. It was a Sunday morning. The news has started breaking just before midnight on Saturday about the crash in the tunnel in Paris, but there was no news about the fate of Diana. We knew Dodi Fayed had sadly perished in the car crash, but Diana was at first said to just be badly injured with a broken collarbone and being treated in hospital. But I managed to get hold of Robin Cook, the Foreign Secretary, who was in Manila on a foreign tour, because I had a correspondent with him, and we found out he'd received a message from the French government to tell him that Diana, Princess of Wales, had died on French soil. That's the way diplomacy works. And at 4:41 a.m, I put that news out in a news flash from the headquarters of the Press Association in Victoria in London, where I was the executive editor.
And Mike, can you just tell us how important Diana was for Fleet Street, just in terms of newspaper circulation? What kind of difference did it make to sales if her face was on the front page?
Well, I can tell you this, Mark. Diana is as big a sale on the front cover of a magazine today as she was 25 years ago on the day before she died. She's been the cover girl fantastique all her life while she was alive, and ever since. Believe me, you know, if you put Diana's face on the cover of anything now, it just sells again. The fascination with her is still remarkable. She was the most famous woman in the world when she died. She was one of the most popular women in the world when she died, and she still is. And a lot of it is because now, these days, she is compared to her successors. She's compared to Kate and she's compared to Meghan. And she comes out favourably alongside Kate and favourably, very favourably, against the other side of royal princesses like Meghan.
Indeed, well put. Well, let's now speak to someone that knows her intimately well. It's time for this. Yes, it's time for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, showbiz, sport and beyond. And a quarter of a century after Diana's tragic death, who better to speak to than the man who kept her safe for 5 years, Ken Wharfe. Joining the Met Police as a special cadet at the age of 17, Ken Wharfe attained the rank of inspector before being selected to join Scotland Yard's elite Royalty Protection Department. This SAS-trained officer was chosen to head up the security for the Queen's grandchildren, heir apparent, Prince William and Prince Harry, who as children effectively called him Uncle Ken. A year later, in 1987, he was appointed a personal protection officer to the Princess of Wales, Diana herself. Ken Wharfe became a close friend and loyal confidant who shared Diana's most private moments. His books, Diana, Closely Guarded Secret, and the follow-up, Guarding Diana, Protecting the Princess Around the World, both became instant bestsellers. And Ken Wharfe joins me now. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Mark. Good evening.
Great to see you. Ken,
and you.
Look, what a journey, what a story. You became William and Harry's bodyguard first in 1986. What were your first impressions of their mother?
I mean, I never forget that day, Mark, because it was really extraordinary. I mean, I was sent up to Sandringham in Norfolk, one of the Queen's palaces there, quite, sort of worried at meeting a member of the royal family, like I think most people had been at that time. And I was shown into this white room by a very attentive butler. And there was William, aged 5, attempting to play the piano, very badly, I might add. And Harry was stood on a small coffee table, destabilising a vase of royal lilies. And Diana said to me, without any introduction from anyone else, I don't envy you look after my kids, Ken, because they could be a bloody nuisance. And William turned around in that sort of just William mode and said, I'm not a bloody nuisance. And Harry could barely speak, said something, fell off this table, followed by this vase that crashed on the floor. Because they legged it, as you would expect, being pursued and chased by the mother. And I hadn't said a thing. And I thought, I never expected this. And this was something completely out of it. But actually, Diana came back and said, I don't envy looking after my 2 kids, Ken. But it was that sense of normalcy of that moment that sort of really did it for me. Because actually, that's something that Diana, throughout her entire life, always craved for. Was something to be normal. And that was my first meeting. But she was incredibly funny. I mean, listening to your guests here, she, even now, 25 years after her death, people still talk about her. But I think the great thing about her was her fun, her sense of humour, certainly her compassion. And all that you said in the introduction, Mark, was all that I recognised.
Yes, and of course, she was devoted to her kids. I mean, yes, she got fed up with them. You've got kids, I've got kids. They can drive you mad, but they were her life.
Oh, they were. I mean, you know, William's first day at school, I remember, in North London, and he had this sort of rather obsession with photographers. He couldn't say photographers because his mother said to him, listen, when you get to school, William, there's going to be a lot of photographers there and I want you to behave yourself. You're going to get this for the rest of your life. And under the sort of peak of his new cab, he said, don't like photographers. Which he didn't do, but I mean...
Some things never change.
But I mean, they were great fun. They were mischievous. I mean, the comparisons, you know, he and Harry were great fun. I mean, Harry was the jester of the pair, you know, and I dare say that, well, I'm for a fact that William was rather envious and jealous of Harry because he was very popular as a kid. But Harry was a real tearaway. I mean, I nearly lost my job once over him because he was trying to relieve a sense of boredom. He came into my office and said, Ken, I need to do something. And I said, OK, look, here's a radio. Go up to the garage, speak to the chauffeur, make a phone call, and I'll give you another job. So we did that 4 or 5 times, gone to the chef, gone to the flower sale, whatever. In the end, he said, can I go down and see Aunt Jane, which was Diana's sister, which was just outside the front of Kensington Palace. So I checked with Diana's sister. Off he goes down to Aunt Jane down at the old barracks. And Jane said, I'll give you a call when he's on his way back. But he was dressed in his sort of khaki, you know, his camouflage army jacket, suit, whatever. Anyway, about 20 minutes gone, I rang Jane. I said, have you sent Harry back yet? And he said, no, I sent him back 10 minutes ago. So a slight panic set in. So I called him up on the radio. I said, Harry, it's Ken, where are you? Just a moment. I'm outside Tower Records, he said. Did a left turn outside of Aunt Jane's and disappeared down to...
This is not what I want to hear.
But actually, it was the quickest run back I'd ever done. But anyway, there he was, this sort of small kid stood outside Tower Records with my radio and everything. But anyway, listen, things happen like that. But great kids, I love them. They were fantastic.
Great kids. And of course, they're grown men now, each respectively married with their own children. What would Diana have made of the tension between the two brothers, and what would she have made of Harry's departure to the United States?
Well, I think what's been missing from my observations and the reading over the last few years is that there needed someone to sort of broker this setup, really. Because, you know, it doesn't quite make sense that as two young kids, they were sort of joined at the hip, really. And, you know, what's more important, of course, that their father, the Prince of Wales, you know, he saw them, certainly when the Queen, you know, said to him 4 or 5 years ago, once the Duke of Edinburgh was sort of relieved of royal duties because of his state of health, you know, the prince had the idea of his 2 young princes being part of this sort of pyramid to sort of move to take the royal family into the future. Sadly, it looks as though he's lost 1/3 of that star now. But Diana, I think, certainly would have understood where Harry was coming from in terms of, you know, wanted a change of life, but would have understood clearly, look, hang on a minute, let's just give this a bit of time, because their departure was really sudden from the royal family. I don't think Meghan gave it a real chance. You know, why did this happen? You know, clearly, like Diana, if there is a similarity, you know, she was incredibly popular. The royal family generally have a problem with junior members coming into the family that are more popular than themselves. So I think that was an issue. So I think Diana would have been a good go-between here to sort this out. Sadly, you know, that never happened.
Diana might have prevented Megxit.
Well, I think, OK, it would have been different from what we now see it as, but I do think Diana, having effectively been there herself, would have seen the value of actually giving this some time. I think their exit was rather premature. But who knows? Personally, I think, you know, we could see Harry and Meghan return in a new style, in a new format. Who knows? I mean, there's a lot of conversation going on about this. But I think, you know, one has to be optimistic. But who knows what might happen? The jury's out on that.
Well, you know Charles very well, of course, because you were responsible for the protection of his children. And I know you think Charles is actually a decent guy, perhaps misunderstood by the public and the press. And do you think he might welcome Harry and Meghan back to the fold when hopefully a long time from now we lose the Queen?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, everything is sort of hinging now on what Harry might be saying in this book that's yet to be released. But I mean, going back to the question there, Mark, the Prince of Wales, you know, was an incredibly generous man during my time working there. And, you know, very difficult for him as it was for Diana in the sort of breakup and collapse of their marriage. But to be fair to him, he acknowledged all the time when I was working that, you know, his 2 children enjoyed the company of their mother more so than him. And he never sort of, you know, wanted to change that, irrespective of there was a deal that they'd have the children every other week. But for most of the time, of course, Diana had the lion's share and more. But the Prince was, you know, a very generous man and a very humorous man and a very funny man. And I had the occasion of working with him on many, many occasions. And Diana was just the same. But There was one story I remember I must tell you, which was so lovely, just to give you an idea of his sense of humour. I went with him one night to the Royal Opera House, and at the end of which he always used to go to the National Gallery privately to look there. And we remember arriving at the Sainsbury wing, and he with his black tie with a small entourage of men and myself, equally dressed in black tie. And there stood by the door is a commissioner. Well, these commissioners didn't have a sort of fitted jacket and suit, but there was this poor chap about 5'6", with a jacket and tie for a man, 6 foot, whatever. So the tie was knotted halfway down his chest, in desperate need of a haircut. And a very nervous man, as the Prince arrived, he sort of came out and said, "Evening, sir." And Mr. Lewis said, "How long have you been here?" He said, 7.5 years, sir. He said, "It's an awful long time to wait for me."
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
But, that was the start. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a chip off the old block in terms of his father's wicked sense of humour.
Well, exactly. I mean, the Duke of Edward, as you know, was a doyen of sort of quick jokes and cracks, which I think that enhances, I think, the royal family. I think we need that.
Well, let's talk about you, because you've been, now you're an expert in security as well as a broadcaster and best-selling author. What a responsibility protecting the most famous and arguably most popular woman in the world, Diana. How did you carry that responsibility? I mean, it must have dominated your life for all those years.
Well, I think, being a bodyguard protection officer, I mean, it's first of all and foremost, the person that you're protecting needs to know that they accept what you're doing. Diana was fantastic in the sense that every week she would write out a list of all that she was doing, privately and public. So we were never in any doubt as to what we had to do.
So she didn't really go AWOL. She wasn't hard to protect.
Well, certainly never went AWOL with me. I mean, but understood and accepted totally why she needed protection. Different perhaps from the other members of the royal family that had protection from birth. She inherited it as a 19-year-old and accepted it and found it at times an intrusion. I mean, it was an intrusion of her privacy. But we were able to sort of work around that and, make it work for her. And, I remember, in 1993 when I left Diana,
And that was the moment at which she lost her title.
Well, exactly
after
that.
the Panorama interview.
Well, no, this was actually before that, Mark. The Panorama didn't happen until 95, but, I left her in the October of 93. And I remember being invited back to Kensington Palace to see her, after I'd left. And we had this fantastic time. It was just like that very first time I met you. I met her in Sandringham, 6 years previously. And we sort of reminisced and talked about the fun times that we had. And there were many, many fun times. She was an incredible person to work with. I don't think I've ever laughed so much in my life. I became the best listener ever and travelled the world, so many times. But she said to me at the very end of it, she said, look, you've always been great and given me good pieces of advice. If there's one piece of advice, what would it be? And I said, well, the best thing I can give you, and I don't know where you're going to go after here, but I said, look, whatever you do is don't give up your Scotland Yard security, because you'll always be Mrs. Wales, whatever you do, even if you, and I jokingly said, even if you change your sex, you're going to need this, because we've always enabled you to do effectively what you want, and we've broken rules, but it's given you that privacy, and I accept that, we have been an invasion of your privacy, but sadly she never did it, and unfortunately that, for me, is probably the reason why I think Diana died. And, I've been very critical and very open about my criticism of the security of that night in Paris. And I do think...
To all intents and purposes, what we know, allegedly, effectively a drunk bouncer at the wheel of her Mercedes-Benz, driving too quickly.
Well, I think what was interesting in the last few days, Mark, was Lord Stevens' report and ultimate programme on national television about the investigation of Diana. And I think, I think we have to listen to what Stevens said, because what he did as a senior police officer, with a team of, the best detectives in the land, they chased the evidence of the facts of that case. And he concluded naturally, in the way that Lord Hervé Seffen did in France and Scott Baker did in the inquest in London, that this was a tragic accident, with the pursuing paparazzi as well. I think what needs to be done now, and I've said this for a long, long time, is that we need to look now and try to establish what went wrong in Paris. In other words, what really did go wrong to cause this? Because there was no conspiracy here. And it was, in my view, it was the ineptitude of the security, sadly, at that time, that was looking after Diana.
And it was private security, it wasn't Scotland Yard, and it wasn't your level of expertise with which you've shared us tonight so much detail. Ken, great to see you. We're friends.
Thank you, Mark.
I know you well. I always feel safe when you're around, I'll be honest with you.
But I'm never getting on your bike, Mike.
Yeah, well, no, too right. I don't get too close to Ken because I've watched The Bodyguard starring Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner, and I know what can happen. But Ken, thank you so much. 2 books, both bestsellers, Find Out Why, both penned by Ken Wharfe. Brilliant stuff. Diana remembered. What a heroine. The paper's next. See you in 2.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 10:30, it's time for this. That's right, at 10:30 every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we bring you tomorrow's newspaper first editions with full panel reaction. First, let's go through all of the headlines before we speak to Mike Porky Parry, Emma Wolfe, and, of course, Mark Foster. And we'll start with the Times newspaper. Here's what they're splashing with. Putin hits West with fresh gas shutdown. Russia stepped up its energy war with Europe last night, indefinitely suspending the supply of gas through a key pipeline to the West. In a move likely to prompt more turmoil in the energy markets, Moscow scrapped today's deadline for the reopening of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Also, power couple Liz Truss with Hugh O'Leary in a 2019 Valentine's Day photograph captioned "Love of my life." Friends described the Tory frontrunner's husband as hugely supportive. Well, the bottom line is that he's about to be the first gentleman, isn't he? He will certainly be married to our next Prime Minister, barring a political earthquake. Daily Express next. Tories put on war footing for snap election. Britain's next Prime Minister is expected to demand the Tory party is put on an election footing from day one, with strategists tipping October the 5th of next year as a potential polling day.
That's hardly snap, is it?
Well, it's long snap, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's effectively a good few months from now. If frontrunner Liz Truss wins the race for number 10, her options for going to the polls will be limited to only 4 or 5 choices, say experts. Well, I get the view of my panel shortly on when that snap election might be. The Telegraph next, energy plan on day one for Truss. Liz Truss is considering setting out her plans to tackle the energy crisis to ministers within 24 hours of taking office. The Daily Telegraph understands that plans are in place for Ms Truss, who's widely expected to win the Tory leadership race, to hold her first cabinet meeting on Wednesday morning. Allies believe she'll use the occasion to lay out her priorities for tackling mounting bills. Also, council to offer 4-day week for same pay. Council workers are to be put on a 4-day week on full pay under proposals from a Lib Dem-controlled local authority as the public sector embraces a movement to reduce working hours.
Madness.
There you go. We'll get reaction from Mike Porky-Parry on that one shortly. The Daily Mail next. Now end the party probe witch hunt. MPs faced mounting pressure last night to halt the Partygate probe into Boris Johnson after a top QC called it unfair and fundamentally flawed. In a bombshell legal analysis, Lord Pannick said the parliamentary inquiry would be declared unlawful were it not protected from challenge in the courts. And Sue Barker, the truth about my romance with Cliff Richard. The plot thickens. The Eye newspaper, Tories fear wrath of voters after Liz Truss coronation. 80% of the public think the government is failing to tackle the energy crisis, according to a poll for the Eye newspaper, as Liz Truss faces a battle with her MPs about how much help to offer hard-up Brits. The Daily Mirror now. Queen's new health blow. Mobility problems force Her Majesty to miss her favourite Highland Games. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that Her Majesty is not feeling well, and we wish her a speedy recovery. The Guardian, let's have a look at what they're leading with. Police Chief, Truss's crime proposals are meaningless. Of course, that's another issue that will be in Liz Truss's inbox, a perception that Britain is now a lawless society. Sebastian, where would you like to go next? OK, let's have the Sun newspaper now. Hooters sponsors under 10 shooters. Kit deal for kids blasted. Of course, it's the rather glamorous burger chain Hooters, who have sponsored children's football. Some of the readers of the Sun newspaper consider that inappropriate. And last but not least, the Daily Star. Energy crisis to ruin Christmas. Sorry, folks, we don't like bad news on this show, but we can't avoid it at times. This year, says the little girl on the front page of the Star, I want a pony and 50 kilowatts per hour of off-peak lecky, please, Santa. Energy prices are so expensive, councils won't be able to afford to turn on festive lights this year. Happy Christmas, folks, say the Daily Star. Perhaps we should skip Christmas altogether. And those are your front pages. Let's get reaction now from former British Olympic swimmer Mark Foster, best-selling author, broadcaster and commentator Emma Wolfe, and Fleet Street and radio legend Mike Porky-Parry. Emma, let's have a look at really bad news on the front page of The Times. Vladimir Putin hits the West with a fresh gas shutdown. We're in trouble, aren't we?
Yeah, we didn't need any more bad news on this. Putin is clearly not happy about the energy price caps, which are being imposed across Europe, and has already said that he won't, I think he was saying yesterday, that he won't supply gas to those countries. And now Nord Stream 1 apparently has faults with it, and so this is going to impose further pressure. Indefinite closure is going to renew the turmoil in European gas markets. We've had predictions that the gas prices will continue to rise throughout 2023 and 2024. It looks incredibly grim going forward. And obviously we need some kind of proper action from our new Prime Minister.
Well, indeed. One opposition politician was on Twitter today who'd had a letter from a constituent that ran a care home, and their previous annual electricity bill had been £250,000. It had jumped to £800,000.
And it's not just care homes, it's schools where children can go for heating and for food. It's libraries, it's museums, it's pubs. Pubs across the land are closing. These are places, these aren't the huge, great big businesses. These are small, family-run businesses whose bills are going from 20,000 to 60,000. They're going to close. This country is really in trouble.
And indeed. Well, the knock-on effect to them is then the shops as well, right? Yeah. Because then if people don't have any excess money, then they're not going to go shopping either. So
that's right. Yeah.
It's the first thing to go, isn't it?
It goes everywhere.
The
high street.
luxuries. Yeah. I mean, we've got a huge problem here, haven't we, Mark? And I wonder whether what's going to have to happen when our new Prime Minister is announced, which inevitably will be Liz Truss, that she's going to have to effectively do a kind of financial intervention that is close to the scale of the furlough scheme.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, she needs to get some trust back. because of all the lies and everything else that's happened, first of all. That goes back to Boris, obviously.
Do you think she can do that? Does it wipe the slate clean, having a new PM?
I don't know what when you
I
said
don't
that.
care about the trust. I just want her to take action. All of this narcissistic stuff about what we think about, we don't care. People are going to be in their homes, freezing cold this winter.
Yeah, but she's
People are
got to
going to
do
be
something.
dying.
They're not, because she's got to do something. That's the point. That's the whole point. All the scare stories are to try and trigger the action that you're demanding.
No,
and
there are
that's
50%
quite right.
of people are too frightened to put their heating on. There are going to be children in cold rooms. There are going to be pensioners who do not put their heating on because they're
We've got to find
frightened.
alternative sources of power. That's what we've got to do. We've got to go round the world, and we can get power from Norway, we can get power from Qatar, we can get power from elsewhere. And also...
We can get power from here, Mike.
Of course we can, but we can't immediately.
That are the problem.
We can't immediately. If we'd opened nuclear power stations in 2012, when the Lib Dems said it's not worth it because they won't be open until 2022, which it is now, if we'd have got on with fracking, we would be self-sufficient. And if we opened up our north... I agree. We should have done
That's
we haven't.
what we should have
so
done.
in the short term, we've got to go and find power elsewhere. Putin is trying it on here.
We've got power in the North Sea. We've got the oil and gas in the North Sea. Liz Truss has signed all sorts of deals.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the next 3 months. It's September.
And so am I. And so am I. Except the Green Lobby will now come along and say, no, you can't start reopening coal mines like the Germans are doing, day after day after day, reopening coal mines. Putin also is trying it on here because he has to fund the war in Ukraine, and the only way he funds it is selling gas to the West.
And he wants to break our spirit, doesn't he?
Yes, of course he does. Yeah, of course he does.
And
But
this is,
we need to be bigger than this.
He wants populations in the UK, and Germany, and across the West to say, look, we've had enough of this war.
Yes, he does.
And he looks across Europe right now, Mark, and he can see every European country in panic about these prices. And so this is his trump card, absolutely.
Germans led the way in making us wholly dependent on him, and thank God only 5% of our gas comes from Russia. But, of course, we have to buy gas on the spot market, and supply and demand, it goes up.
Well, that's right. I mean, Mark Foster, are you willing to pay higher taxes to bail out people who are struggling to heat their homes?
What the bottom line is, yes. I suppose that's one of those things. If it happens for everybody, then the answer to that is yes.
Well, we've seen, haven't we, in the course of the pandemic, £500 billion borrowed, empty money printed through the Bank of England in order to pay people to stay at home. I mean, I was vociferously against that policy. 3 national lockdowns. We're now paying the financial price. I mean, £500 billion, you could heat everyone's home with that money and have plenty of spare change. But do you think the public could stomach, and can the nation's finances stomach that level of borrowing again to heat people's homes?
Well, I suppose the answer to that is we have to do what we have to do.
We have to. Remember the government came up with hundreds of billions of pounds to bail out the banks, OK? So if you can come up with hundreds of billions to bail out the banks, you can come up with hundreds of billions.
Billion to do a track and trace.
Well, that was...
come up with hundreds of billions
absolutely wasted money.
We say that, but that was...
warm.
Well, you're absolutely right, but that was when we had something like 80% of debt as a proportion of the size of our economy. Now it's 100%.
What we have to do is we have to do, and I say this with a bad taste in my mouth, is we have to do what Sir Keir Starmer has suggested, which is freeze the energy price cap at 1,900, which he stole from the Lib Dems. That's what we're going to have to do.
But who's going to pay for this? Where does the money come from?
The country have to pay for it. We all have to pay for it over the next...
But does that mean more inflation? And we've also got militant trade unions at the same time seeking pay rises.
The best plan would
Hence, our country is broken.
would be the guy from Scottish Power's come up with the best plan. A £100 billion fund underwritten by the government, which then subsidises the price rise in energy, which you pay off over the next 15 years. So, in effect, you're going to have a second mortgage in your life to pay your energy funds now. Eventually, the price of all this will go down again. Eventually, this will end. Eventually, we'll find new sources like fracking, and it'll go down. But in between time, people are going to have to extend their borrowing, their own personal borrowing, because I don't think the government necessarily should be responsible for bailing everybody out. We've all got to make cuts. For instance, people in the middle classes who take 3 holidays a year will take 2, and people who've got 2 cars parked on their driveway will have to reduce it to 1 car.
That's just not fair.
We've all got to make sacrifices.
We're talking about people on extremely low incomes. Of course, people who take 3 holidays have to take 2. I'm not worried about them or get rid of 1 car or whatever. We're talking about households who are on very low income.
They will be looked after by the government.
Looked after what? Get their £400 through their universal credit?
No, we are a very
I know
compassionate
older people
nation.
who are saying they're moving into their kitchens for the winter with a blanket on and they're going to live in 1 room. room. I know people who are putting their children all in one room with them to stay warm at night.
Did you grow up in a house with central heating?
Yeah, but my dad didn't put it on.
I didn't. I grew up in a house where there was ice on the inside of the window. And I'm not saying...
you were living in the northwest, which is pretty brisk in the winter.
Exactly. So I'm not saying I'm a martyr. What I'm saying is we are all mollycoddled, you know, in modern life at what we expect as a standard of living. You can live without central heating. You can live without putting the heat on. Because I went through it and did it. My mum and dad lived in even more impoverished circumstances. So we just have to go backwards a bit.
But, Mike, I do agree with you. I do agree with you. I think we're mollycoddled. I think that youngsters expect mobile phones, coffees, whatever, la. I do agree with that basic point. But I also think you have to think about pensioners that can't get out and about and move around.
I totally
people
agree
who are
with
disabled,
you.
Who
and they will be looked after.
On the most vulnerable side.
Yeah.
I think
really vulnerable people who really are frightened, but they're the most frightened as well.
And they will be looked after.
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Now, Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert...
What a hero. He has been amazing. He doesn't need to bother with all this.
Well,
he's amazing.
He's an impressive guy. He went viral on Twitter this week. Dear Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, the cost of living crisis has left millions worried how they'll make ends meet. I'd like to invite you, as the new PM, to join me ASAP for a special show to discuss these issues. Edwina Currie, who is joining us on Sunday night to discuss... the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
Not a catastrophe at all.
On Sunday night, by the way, a new Prime Minister special on this programme. For 2 hours, we will preview what is going to be a really challenging year or two for Liz Truss. We know that she's got it in the bag, so we'll debate that with lots of people that know her intimately well. Well, Edwina Currie is with us on Sunday, but she tweeted the following to Martin Lewis. She said, I'd like you, Martin, to stop using words like catastrophe and instead advise people to take sensible steps to reduce the effect on their families and businesses and stop pretending that governments can do everything they can't.
Well, they haven't done anything, frankly. And Edwina Currie, I was debating this with her on the radio the other day, was talking about turning off your underfloor heating. Underfloor heating.
Who's got that?
So, right, well, it just shows
Meghan
how out of
Markle's
touch she
got it,
is.
I think.
And also, Edwina
Got
happens to
16
have...
bathrooms.
I don't know what the pensioners... what the MP's pension is, but I imagine it's pretty good.
Pretty healthy. Mark, what do you think about Edwina Currie's comments? Governments can't do everything.
Well, they can't do everything, but they can do some things. And I think sometimes we spend money in the wrong areas.
Yeah, we do. I totally agree.
How many millions are they wasting on these inquiries?
I totally agree with Edwina Currie there, and I've done a show here with her before as well. Martin Lewis, who incidentally went to my school, the King's School Chester, we were at the same school together, but he has become so obsessed by, you know, the whole issue, he's frightening people to death.
No, I think
using
it's
words
brilliant.
like catastrophe, we're all doomed,
it's all
champion. You know, we're all going to die and all that.
He is a billionaire, probably a billionaire, who doesn't really bother with any of...
I think he's been ridiculously over the top.
I also don't want to labour the point. I'm a big fan of this guy. I think he's a great consumer champion. But did he speak out against lockdowns, which have cost the economy £500 billion?
That's irrelevant.
Yes. He's a money expert.
Now.
He's a money expert, and if he's a money expert, Mark is absolutely right to point out he didn't seem to have much advice as to how to get over lockdown, which has put us all in poverty.
Yeah, I mean, £500 billion, you know, sorting out people's heating bills would be small change.
Of course it would.
Yeah. So, look, let's go on to a possible snap election, if we can, Mark. What do you think about that? Tories put on war footing for snap election, potentially October the 5th of next year. When hopefully...
That's a year away. It's not a snap election,
It's not a snap election, Mark Foster, but it is an election that would be ahead of schedule. That would be before the term is complete. So that would be, and you know, she could go the full 5 years, but many experts think she'll go early. What do you think?
Well, to me, it stinks of desperation, really. If you need to do that, ultimately, that quickly. I mean, listen, I'm not massively into politics. I only know what I know and I only read what I read, but...
Well, it's opportunism, isn't it? All politicians.
I think you know, my thing is, it's like watching footballers, give her a fair chance to see what she does.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether actually, if she goes to the polls as quickly as possible so that we can have political stability, that we can then have 5 years of a coherent government to tackle the country's big problems.
I think we go for a snap election at the moment, though. They're hiding to nothing.
I just think this is deeply self-indulgent. Come on, Mark. We've had, 6, 7, 8 weeks? Well, we've had an entire year, really, of internal Conservative Party trauma and struggles, and who said what to whom, who had a glass of glass of wine and a mouthful of cheese or a birthday cake, whatever. The whole year we've been heading towards this crisis, and we've been talking about the Conservative Party and Boris and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Now can we just get on? I don't even care who it is anymore. I literally don't even care if it's Keir Starmer. We just need a stable government, and we need to get this country back together. The idea of having an election next year, and I love politics, I'm addicted to them, I'm a complete junkie, I love all this stuff, I'd love an election next year, but we don't need this. We don't need this by next year. And I would have actually thought that the Tory party would be avoiding it.
But I wonder whether it wouldn't be a bad shout, Mike Porky Parry, because I think that if, whether it's Starmer or Truss, but if somebody becomes Prime Minister and they've got a 5-year term, they can then deliver the tough medicine that our economy needs.
Yeah, but look at the way Prime Minister's got it wrong in the past. When Gordon Brown first took over from Blair, he should have gone to the country, and he wavered. David Cameron actually said in the House of Commons, he's not calling an election because he's worried he might win it. Because that was Gordon Brown's defence. You know, I don't want to improve my majority because I want to get on with government. On the other hand, Theresa May came in and said, bang, actually 18% ahead in the polls and ran the worst general election campaign in the history of elections, right? So it depends on the individual politician, their ability to run an election. That's what it's all about.
OK, well, I've got lots to get through, and I want to cover whether zoos are outdated, plus we've got our news-based game show after the break. Before that, Emma, let me ask you about this story in The Telegraph. Council to offer 4-day week for the same pay.
What is this for their mental health? I'm sorry, I'm coming across as really vehement, but I barely read this one. I just, frankly, it's a Lib Dem proposal.
You saw the headline.
I saw the headline and I rolled my eyes.
A week.
Well,
30 hours working week, that's what they want. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is, Mark Foster, he only did about 3 hours in the pool every day, didn't you?
My race was 20 seconds.
So there you go.
Yeah.
I could say nothing.
I mean, what do you think about this? Because, you know, you mentioned you're not wildly political, but this is an issue that affects all of us, which is what our working week looks like.
Mm-hmm. I think that's been trialled in lots of different areas, isn't it? Looking at a 4-day week as opposed to 5 days.
Well, everyone wants a 4-day week.
Well, Fridays are effectively off. No one's around on a Friday.
But nobody in government or public services.
Is what people
whereas a plumber works.
Change, though.
Well, look, I tell you what, we're putting in a shift tonight. We've got lots more to come. Next up, are zoos outdated? Plus another game show. See you in 2.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
As always, between 10:30 and 11, it's the papers, and Boris Johnson's still very much a fixture of tomorrow's papers. I've got a reaction from our Boris discussion from Paul, who says, Mark, why this obsession with Boris Johnson? As a former police officer, I distrusted him on sight. We don't need someone so lacking in morals, and his insane green policies are ruining us and are based on a lie. Thank you for that, Paul. On gas, Dave says, with no gas to lose, threaten to put the British armed forces into Ukraine and scare Putin for a change, says Dave. And Bryn, on the GP debate earlier, are primary healthcare services fit for purpose? This from Bryn, who says, Dear Mark, in response to your request for comments on GP services, my immediate response is the system is not fit for purpose. I had a stroke 4 years ago and was released early from a hospital critical care unit after 3 weeks because of the urgent need for beds. Promised home support. It didn't happen. Only his friends and family got him through. Well, Bryn, I hope that you're feeling better, and thank you for sharing that. Look, let's get much more from my panel. Bristol Zoo are closing after 186 years at their historic 12-acre site. Almost 200 years old, the world's oldest provincial zoo will close tomorrow after a shortfall caused by lockdowns. Whilst the location is expected to be replaced with sustainable homes, the Bristol Zoological Society, who own the attraction, are setting their sights on a new spot. But are zoos outdated? Mike, I think you've got strong views on this.
Oh, I'd close all zoos down. I
Really?
just can't understand how any sensible, intelligent human being in this day and age can say it's all very well to keep an intelligent animal in a cage. And people say, oh, they're not in cages. Haven't you seen the elephant pound? The elephant compound is probably, at best, an acre. Elephants should be roaming around Africa and India. They shouldn't be roaming around a field in the middle of Bristol. It's an outrage. I don't know how any human being can believe that, you know, capturing animals and keeping them in captivity is anything other than torture to those poor animals. And when people say, oh, well, we've got to protect the species, what is the point of protecting a species if you're going to lock it up in a field for the rest of its life? It's not worth it.
What do you think, Mark?
I think what zoos should have been used for is to educate people on the beauty of the nature that is out there in the world, but actually change their habits and their behaviours to make sure that those things are, because we know the problem we have with the environment, they change the way they behave. But it doesn't happen. My inner child said, I used to love going to the zoo.
Yeah.
But I look at it now and I just think, nah. But that's all, we can all reflect as we get older and we see the world in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a wonderful way for children to connect with nature, though, Emma.
It is really
You've got
difficult.
kids, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got to have a 2-year-old, and I know that he, you know, his face when he first saw an elephant in London Zoo. And I remember going to London Zoo as a child all the time. But what can be sadder than seeing elephants and gorillas and giraffes confined, you know, mentally,
unbelievable,
physically confined? You know, animals go through trauma, boredom, loneliness, all sorts of really, really, you know, they do
mental
suffer.
breakdowns.
They
have,
do.
Animals
they
have mental
display this kind of
breakdowns.
neurotic behaviour. They have this
Bang their heads
repetitive
against
pacing.
walls and all that kind of stuff.
Bang their head against
Have
the
you ever
bars.
been to South Africa, to the Kruger National Park,
I've been to
and
proper
drive
safari.
alongside a giraffe that's lolloping along in the road, the magnificent creature like that, and you think you only get as far as 6 paces inside a zoo in Britain.
It's true. But then that begs the question, what's scarier, a giraffe or Mike Porky Parry in an SUV? A pair of binoculars. Thanks for your company. Do join us tomorrow at 9.
Hello. It's looking rather unsettled across the UK through this weekend with a mixture of showers and longer spells of rain. Often winds will be stronger as well, but in between all of that, there will still be some warm, sunny spells. If we look at the pressure pattern then, for most areas today was dry. There were some really quite heavy showers around, particularly towards the southwest of England. But towards the west, we have seen cloud thickening, and that's tied in with this weather front that's spreading in from the Atlantic. And this weather front's going to bring a very wet spell of weather across many western parts through Friday night into Saturday. So you can see some heavy rain affecting western Scotland and Northern Ireland through the night, with a warning in force from midnight. But elsewhere across the UK, largely dry. Still 1 or 2 showers, a few fog patches towards the south. But actually, for many areas, it'll be a quiet night. Not cold anywhere. Temperatures not falling below 14 to 16 degrees, with those winds starting to strengthen across parts of Scotland. So for much of the UK, we get off to a dry start on Saturday with some early sunshine, but across the west, rain from the word go will be quite heavy across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, and that rain will continue for much of the day. So that's what's going to bring the risk of that localised flooding. We will see rain starting to spread in across the west of Wales, southwest England, but elsewhere largely dry with some sunny spells in places, but that could spark off some heavy, possibly thundery showers through the afternoon with the risk of hail, with those strong winds continuing across the far north. Still warm and humid though in that sunshine. Now through Saturday evening and overnight, all those showers will spread their way northwards. Totally dry for a time, but we'll see more heavy rain spreading in across Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England. So again, those rainfall totals mounting up across parts of Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, largely dry, like I said, and again, no real problems with temperatures, holding out 14 to 17 degrees. So some parts of the east will get off to a largely dry start on Sunday morning with some early brightness. Still a spell of rain across parts of Scotland, but this rain in the west will spread its way eastwards as we head through Sunday. So most of us will see a spell of rain. Still dry across the far southeast of England and East Anglia. Brighter skies following and from the west as we head into the afternoon. Still rather warm though in that sunshine. Staying changeable into the early part of next week with a mixture of showers and longer spells of rain, but still with some sunshine in between and staying warm.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. An investigation has been launched following a security breach in the Commons after Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves together around the Speaker's chair. Posing as tourists, they